everyone. So yes, I'm Alison Teichman. I am part of the Brand Solutions team at TeamSnap, and we are the leading platform for organizing and managing your youth sports. We work with brands to convert super fans from our families. And so I think it's only fitting that they matched up the parents with the pets to talk about families. So I have the pleasure of introducing you to Nick James. So if you would please introduce yourself for us, Nick, and tell us a little bit about your role at Blue Buffalo.
Hi everyone, my name is Nick James, and I happen to be lucky enough to work for Blue Buffalo. And so Blue Buffalo is owned by General Mills, and we are the leading pet brand in the natural space. We've been around for 20 years, and I'm lucky enough to lead a really amazing team focused on our consumer experiences in digital products. And so that's really when you think of first-party, zero-party data, and those type of engagement actions, and also in channels that really drive positive, joyful outcomes for pet parents, and helping engage and educate them. Because when I heard earlier from Rebecca, I mean, pets are like family, and so they are the babies or the fur babies for many families, and so we're here to help aid and guide them through those experiences.
Awesome. So I'm excited to hear a lot about Blue Buffalo. Still, before we get to that, you have a really interesting career path. If you could just describe that journey for us, please.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, my journey is pretty unique, I think, from my perspective. It's not linear, and it's really focused on this idea of curiosity. And so for over 20 years almost, I worked for Nike Inc., plural, across all their categories and their brands. And so I'm lucky enough to have landed at Blue Buffalo. But the reason why I think it's unique and curious is my path started in marketing, then went over to product and merchandising, and then call it the later chapter of my life. The last 10 years have been really focused on digital and connecting the spaces between the physical world and the digital world as best as you can. And I think what a lot of the panels and the individuals who come up here have spoken about is it's really a learning journey. And it's this aspect of the world is changing and evolving, and sometimes faster than we want. And it's trying to keep up with the pace of the consumers as their wants and their needs change, and trying to figure out better ways to solve their problems as best as you can based on either the capability or the capacity that you sit in, and more importantly, really the brand you try to represent to be clear and mindful and authentic to their needs.
Great, thank you. So thinking through Blue Buffalo, so I did an informal poll with my fellow team snappers. And listen, we're all brand marketers in the room, right? So let me do this quick little exercise. Think about what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you all think about Blue Buffalo. Just think about that in your mind. And I'll share what my team came up with. And then you can tell us a little bit about if we're on track and this is what you're looking for. High quality, active, natural, rough and rugged, that's a phrase, better for them, and good for food sensitivities.
Pretty darn accurate, yeah. The rough piece, maybe not so much, but if one of the bishops were here who founded the company 20 years ago, they had a motif, an idea of a buffalo, right, is leader of the herd, and how buffaloes call it integrate with each other and call it control their outcomes. So it was kind of this rough and tumble, and you can kind of see it in some of the earlier product and packaging. It did kind of have this motif of a very rough and rumble brand.
Great, so we are here to talk a little bit about some digital trends. So, softball this one over to you, since it is the title of our session. What are some of the latest trends that you're excited about, specifically for your brand?
I think one of the latest trends we've been seeing in our space is, and I heard this in regards to when we think of audiences and thinking about multicultural, is we start to think about dietary triggers and triggers that pets deal with on a day-to-day or annual life cycle basis. And so really thinking about how do we start to take maybe that macro scalable level of data or insights that we're capturing and start to distill that into really specific personas and supporting those pet behaviors. So that's one area. And I think it's cool, but it's also kind of scary, is a lot of this segmentation and fragmentation that's happening in the digital marketplace when we think of channels, when we think of mediums and content. It's awesome to have that challenge in front of you, but it's also challenging in itself of how to prioritize those areas where you want to go and call it, support and nurture those relationships, and then where are the areas where maybe you just need to pause. An example that I can think of highly over like the last year and a half is there was camps that really wanted to go after, Web3 or Metaverse, and I as much did, but we really had a pause because we had to be really thoughtful in regards to like, could we actually do something that's gonna drive an outcome? And knowing that we also had to basically protect the core, the fundamentals of some of our core own channels, and then the third-party channels that really drive outcomes from a sales standpoint. So that's from like a digital essence. And then I think the other aspect, what we are seeing is when we think of channels, own channels specifically, is our cat parent as an example is really highly engaged, for instance, in Twitter. And so we're fundamentally starting to shift and change content and the type of engagement we would have in that channel versus, for instance, some of the other channels that you might have in social media. And so that's kind of like a cool trend that we're seeing and trying to focus on.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about measurement. And so I'm interested and curious about your view, especially as some of these digital trends are emerging. And we all know how important it is for measurement. So what are some of the tools that you use, or how do you really process the measurement piece for some of these trends?
I think it's a blend, and I say that in regards to, each function, and sometimes it's based on experience or based on wisdom or based on maybe a third-party consultant who's helping drive the narrative, like what's the right thing to measure. is something that, our consumer insights and analytics team really measures. I think the uniqueness there is it's a standpoint in time, right? So it's almost like you set the chalk line at that period of time and you're measuring those outcomes, which is great, right? So that's probably a good validation of the work you did. But I think one of the things a lot of us, I think, in this room wrestle with is, well, we want to be on the forefront, not on the back front in regards to what consumers are doing. And so it's trying to understand what I believe in is first-party and zero-party data that drives some of those behavioral touch points that you can collect and understand, and then pull that into what would be the tactics or the actions you want to bring to market, or products or experiences you want to build out, and trying to find a good blend. I don't think there's a right solution, and I was just talking with an individual here, is just where the world is going. Like, we are trying to get in the forefront. We're working on some proprietary stuff to help drive some of that in the digital measurement space that would allow us to have better propensity models. But that, to me, is also, I'm not gonna say it's the Wild Wild West, but it is more on the forefront of how I think a lot of brands are thinking about their business today in the digital landscape. And I also will state this as, I don't know what tomorrow's gonna bring. And so I think this goes back to like, what's the learning mindset and the learning agenda that you're gonna have when leveraging these tools.
Yeah, that's right. And, the measurement piece is important, of course, with everything we do, and certainly with bringing that back to your internal teams, stakeholders. So I'll ask you this, because I'm actually really curious about this. I think some of the interesting things that we learn on panels like this are not just the wonderful, flashy, awesome things that we all do, which is great, but it's also about some of the challenges we face. So can you talk to me a little bit about some of those internally, so especially when it comes to digital trends? How hard is it to convince some of the internal stakeholders that you've got that we should be diving in headfirst and going after them?
I think AI was a good example that I heard a lot today. And I'm chuckling because it didn't happen with my team, but the fact what AI can do and how it can be represented and what it means outside of, call it, your four walls or your cloud-based walls, and what that could lead to privacy and security reasons. I mean, you could put your blueprint or your roadmap, but maybe your strategy and your KPIs out to the market if you haven't done through the right governance and legal situations. So that's like one area where I think, some people will lead and some people are worried about, that generation of new technology, because also people have been internalizing, well, will that take away work? I actually don't think so. I think it's gonna really help us work better. But the internal struggles I think we struggle with is what are the right digital applications and even attribution points that really drive value. So when we speak to, for instance, first-party data, it's maybe not as large as some of the third-party we might be able to capture, but there's actually a little bit more significance of value there. And so figuring out how to really balance that out, almost like a layered cake, and figuring out which one is gonna be more important based on the approach, or call it the brief that's coming in to drive outcomes. And so the example today that I used earlier was when we talk dietary triggers, first party is a lot more valuable because we actually can understand the behavior, the wants and the needs and the insights, versus maybe when we think of some of our bigger core brands, that third party is super valuable just because it has a wider audience reach and it has a little bit more value. And then from a digital standpoint, where I'm constantly pushing is this idea of how to plan your business agilely. So thinking through like 2-week sprints versus thinking about, I call it like a waterfall. You still need to plan annually and quarterly, but everything in business changes based on the hour and sometimes the day. And yes, you might project a strategy out, call it a month out or 2 months out, but I think COVID taught us a lot. And I even think now, while many of you faced some of the pressures of pricing and inflation, it's really tough to project that out. And so I think it's being able to kind of like take that approach of learning and being able to call it, I use the term pivot, and move your teams based on different goals and outcomes. And I'll be honest, this last year we had to do that a lot, specifically with my team, just to help support the rest of the business. And that is something that's not always easy to do. It's easy to say, but it's not always easy to do because sometimes people are worried about their territories, or sometimes people just, are worried about, well, how will I be measured, how will I be graded? And I think about it, it's more about how they show up and how they respond and act based on the current state of the business and the consumer, and helping the brand and move ourselves forward based on the needs of the business and where we're seeing the consumer move or shift.
So something that I can tell from talking to you that you're really proud of is your new app. And I was hoping you could share a little bit about it with the audience, because I think we can take a lot from some of the digital trends that you guys are working on currently.
So almost 2 years ago, come August 8th, we launched our first, I'm gonna say, true digital product outside of a website, which is Buddies. It's an app, and it's, I'm gonna say, it's a little bit of a mega app. In the pet space, a lot of apps are really segmented or fragmented based on the user type. And so what we try to do based on the insights we are learning is we try to build an application that really focused on what we call the 9 moments that matter, and ensuring that those products and those capabilities help actually connect engagement. So when I talked about educating, engaging those pet parents so that they can nurture and drive wellness and really unique behavior for their pet, we really wanted to focus on that. What we did build out and is something that's tied to a loyalty program. So it's just not about how you earn, but it's also how you engage. Inside the app, we built out a content forum, so we do have audio, podcasts, and articles to help support those pet parents. We also built out a community. So during COVID, for instance, a lot of people were stuck inside, and they had kind of lost that community and that feeling. And so we built out a Connect group that is a little bit different than some of like the Reddits or some of the other Facebook groups. That's a little bit more safe, a little bit more focused on pets in their upbringing. And then also we stood up a couple other unique capabilities. One was open chat, so almost pet parent guidance, so that when pet parents have questions, the 0 moment of truth, if it's online or if it's in aisle, we have somewhat of a backstop there to help answer some of those questions, because there's a lot of anxiety there. And the reason why I'm proud of it is over the last 2-3 months, we've received a bunch of different awards or honorees from Levies and Stevie's and Loyalty 360. And so I think that is kudos not to me, but really to the team of taking the vision and the approach and really bringing it to market, but not just bringing it to market, actually iterating and optimizing off of it. And I think what it's led for us at Blue Buffalo and even General Mills is when we talk about first party data and start to really engage with those audiences, the intent here is not to take away from our retailers and our partners, but actually to be a supplement in regards to how they sell those products on a digital shelf or on a physical shelf as best as we can. And we see this application going in other aspects for our brand and our business to help support the needs of the business. More importantly is, in the days, to me, where I want to win is about the pet parent and driving that one-to-one relationship. And so that's my passion, where I truly believe we need to set our North Star.
Yeah, great. Let's talk about that one-to-one relationship, because it's something that we hold near and dear to our hearts. At TeamSnap, of course, reaching parents and families, it's a very similar story to your consumers as well. So tell me a little bit about how you build these unique and and authentic experiences with these families.
Yeah, and I think it's, over the arc of time, it's been a learning curve for us. We did start out with having audience-led journeys, and I think what's been great about that is we've now started to unpack it and create personas, and those personas allow us to maybe have a little bit more of authentic truth with the end user, and more importantly, it allows us to also dictate where we want to put immediate focus with those consumer behaviors and try to drive outcomes. One thing that I also think it's allowed us to do is experiment a little bit faster than what we traditionally would have done in this space, because we feel like we have a right and also say really a blueprint of applications that we can do that versus maybe having to go through, you know, an agency and a third party and stand something up. So it allows us to, I'm gonna say, adapt as best as we can. Adaption too is based on the individual who's helping drive those outcomes, but that's one thing that I think is pretty unique and cool.
Awesome, thank you. I will open it up to questions. Save on your vet fees. Oh no, I'm not supposed to say kids in that. Kids in that.
Thank you. My question is, as you go through and take a look at a digital trend, how do you determine or evaluate whether something you're seeing digitally is a short-term flash in the pan or a long-term taste or preference that's here to stay?
That's a really great question. Something that becomes a trend. Here's one area where I think it becomes a trend, and it wasn't, I'm gonna say we weren't on the forefront of it. Some of it was the creative iterations that we've taken over the last 7-8 months. So we normally would tell our story about why Blue Buffalo was created and how it really helps the wellness and the health of the pet. One of the things that we weren't probably leveraging as much was really we create and receive a bunch of great reviews from pet parents. And so we started to leverage that in really a lot of our digital content. And it was almost like an experiment to see which one would outperform the other. And actually many of those applications in the right channels actually outperformed some of our other content that we were creating. And so what we were able to do then, and that was specifically with our dog pet parents and some of our dog portfolios, now we've been able to reapply some of those learnings across the cat and our treating portfolios. And so I think that's one area where, not like I said, we weren't on the forefront, we were more responding, where I think that isn't just a trend, I think that's just the baseline, fundamental, of how you have to come to market and go and leverage digital insights, yeah.
Did like the slow lift, okay.
Hi, I feel like the dog food industry is one that's built on pretty extreme customer loyalty. So, you know, with my dog, when I first got him, I tested a couple dog foods until we found one that didn't upset his stomach or whatever. And for the remainder of his life, that's probably the dog food we're gonna get for him. And so I'm curious, in a digital environment where, with a lot of products, every time you go to purchase that product, the companies are competing for your attention, versus with dog food, where subscription trends are becoming more and more popular, how that affects your digital strategy.
You're right. I mean, the pet business is pretty sticky. If you're able to get someone to trial the product, you know, you have a higher potential, right, of keeping them for the life cycle of the pet from a marketing standpoint. I think where disruption does happen through COVID and during this maybe recession or pre-recession time is there's been a lot of out of stocks from certain brands, and so either you can lose business or you can gain business from that. And I've seen it when I started at Blue Buffalo early on, specifically on our cat side of the house. We were gaining business because we were seeing out of stocks, and then I've seen it basically on the flip side in some of our dog business this last year where we weren't able to service the product as well, so we did lose some of that stickiness. Subscription is normally about a fourth to a fifth. You think of like the business in the pet space where it's naturally driving that retention, that stickiness. I think the question will be is, does subscription still stand, right? As people go through these decisions around what they want to spend and how well that food is maybe panning out for their pet. The other thing is, in this environment too, is people potentially go back to work or maybe spend dollars other places, does subscription models start to change differently? As an example, I know Bark was just out recently with their statement too, of just like what they're seeing in changes. So I think that will be a unique proposition, but yes, it is normally a very stickier product or category.
So you might call it Pets and Learn. Tough crowd. One more quick question. Thank you. All right, we have one more.
Do I have to answer this guy's question?
It's not gonna be that bad, don't worry. So I was gonna ask, first-party data, zero-party data, obviously there can be some expense up front in terms of commanding that, as well as like engagement, new experiences. What have you found successful in sort of building the business case for sort of the collection of first-party data, what the value is to the company, knowing that still a lot of your transactions are going through stores?
Josh, I know Josh, I've worked with Josh on one of these panels. I think one of the things that we've learned is the cost of acquisition, right? And what is the right benchmark we should be, call it, measuring ourselves at? And then what are the right channels to measure those benchmarks? So I think that's one thing where we're trying to push the agenda there, because also when we think of our media plans, 80-some% is really awareness based. And so what is the value underneath that when you think of the funnel? Where we're also trying to push the business thinking use cases is look at all the insights we're capturing, right? That literally the user or the consumer is raising their hands, giving to us versus having to go purchase it from the outside. And so we're going through that evolution of like, well, what's the right, call it, channel of insights that we should be capturing and leveraging. And then I think fundamentally what I've been pushing too is using our first party when we talk about media, and starting that is called the baseline of how we want to go target and use it from a technical standpoint. It's not gonna meet all the needs, but that should be the starting point, because we do have much more robust and rich data, and when we've done comparisons or sample sets, normally we see a 50 to 90% improvement based on that CAC than using other, call it third party. Now, I'm not saying that's across the board, but in a lot of the use cases, I'm bad 2 out of 3. I'll take that at any time, to be honest, in this space, so.
Very tasteful answer. Alison, Nick, thank you so much. That was really informative.